What is abusive but not widely recognized as abuse? Using therapy speak to try and demonize anyone who inconveniences you as an abuser. Using good intentions as leverage to control people and demonize them when they ultimately choose another route. Similarly, using spiritual and new age concepts to narrow down what's acceptable for a person and to try to claim some sort of moral and spiritual high ground. You're never allowed to be judgmental, but they criticize everything you do. You're not allowed to give even constructive criticism, though you're not allowed to comment on my journey. The door is closed. I knew a guy who claimed to meditate 3 hours a day and was always wandering off to meditate in the most visible location possible whenever we were out and about, but I came to realize his meditating in private was really him locking himself in his room and doing drugs while cruising for sex online, but pretending it was meditation so he could pretend at some sort of enlightened perspective in every conversation. I started reading up on some basic Buddhist concepts when he tried to get me interested in yoga to help with some muscle and flexibility issues, and I'd start conversations seemingly really basic, Rita the hungry ghost, root breathing, etc., and he'd never heard of them before. But he loudly considers himself to be a Buddhist and uses it as an out when called out on things. I couldn't have done that. I'm a devout Buddhist and care deeply about how I affect people. Oh gosh, I knew a girl who was a psych major and also an absolutely horrible person that would constantly use therapy speak to insist upon her own perpetual victimhood and diagnose everyone else who challenged her in any way as an evil narcissist. Edit. Context of this story is that this girl was cheating on a friend of mine who was out of town at the time taking care of his mother, who had cancer, with his best friend. I told him what was going on, and she had a 6-month-long mental break where she was coming to my house, threatening to kill me, threatening to kill herself, just all this crazy stuff. She ended up stealing a ton of money from his bank account, killed her pet bearded dragon, and dropped out of school because we made her fail her classes. Years later, she still tells people that I was an evil narcissist who was jealous of her and hell, bent on destroying her life. Encouraging someone when they are having destructive behaviors. But you're so much fun when you're drunk. Come on, it can't be that bad. Just have one beer. You don't have to stop. You can just cut back, right? Yeah, that's a horrible but troublingly common statement. I quit drinking a few months ago, and as soon as I said to my girlfriend I was going to quit, she without hesitation said she'd quit with me to help me through. The next day I was Googling engagement rings. One of my worst mistakes in my relationship with my husband was that he'd been self-medicating with drugs and alcohol for a while, and I'd tried everything to get him to stop, to no avail. He had gone to rehab, which really helped, but then, whenever I'd travel for work, he'd relapse. Well, the reason he was relapsing was because of his diagnosed but uncontrolled depression and anxiety. After one of his benders, and after a fight, he said he thought killing himself would just be easier. I responded, my voice dripping in sarcasm, that'd be easier and fix all his problems. Later, when emotions had cooled down, he told me that he knew I was being sarcastic, but it didn't even matter. A part of him believed I wasn't being sarcastic, and it really hurt him, and was the worst thing he's heard me say. I learned that it's never okay to say things like that, even if you're trying to be absurd about it, and your heart is in the right place, and I still feel awful. This was years ago. My husband is on the right antidepressants, has a good job, and even has a healthy relationship with alcohol. We'll have 3 drinks and stop, and often it's 1, not 3. There hasn't been a relapse in at least 3 years. We've both moved past it, but I still cringe. Putting the pressure of huge expectations on a child and then telling everyone that all of these dreams are the child's dreams, even though they are obviously yours. Child actors come to mind, their parents living vicariously through their children. Related, having a child because you need someone to take care of you in your old age. Related, having a child because you need someone to take care of you in your old age. My wife has been dealing with this from her mother, who is very combative and difficult, and likes to try and sow discord between whatever 2 people are convenient, so she can watch the fight. She's been tossed out of the last family member's house that will live with her, and she has an apartment. My other half told her straight up, if this doesn't work, if you lose this apartment, the next step is the nursing home, because I'm not burning my family to the ground to keep you happy. Withholding life skills from your offspring to keep them insecure and dependent. Edit if this resonates with you. There's an excellent support sub at Restranged Adult Kids. Arg, my mom was the opposite. I vaguely explained that this thing Why can't you understand it? Like taxes and how putting an electricity bill under your name works. I was emancipated at 16 and my mom believed she equipped me 100% to live on my own. Even now, in my 30s after rebuilding a relationship with her, if I ask her a question about how the world works, she says, "Can't you figure that out on your own?" It's literally been like that since I was a child. I've learned to not ask her for anything, and she gets mad that I don't call more often. Edit. I'm mid-late 30s and grew up out in the country. We didn't have internet in our pockets then. Now when I ask my mom a question, it's like when you bought your house. Did you do X or Y? Is there a website to find a divorce lawyer? Who do you use for your tax accountant? How do I start POA for my sick dad? It's okay, everyone. I learned to cook on my own with a cookbook and can handle simple life stuff like how to put an electricity bill in my name lol. Also, to everyone who had less than informative parents, I'm so sorry this resonated with you. That hurts. Sorry to hear her loss. Some people weren't meant to be parents. I think some of it is because she became a parent when she was still a child and had to figure a lot of stuff out on her own. Not making excuses, I just recognize the root of her issue, or I try to, I guess. She also plays the "you never call" game, and then I look at my call history, and I'm the only one making outgoing calls in the last year. Some people just never grow up past the point they have children. And for some people, that's 15 years old. They will always be 15, even when they are 60 old. As a SPED teacher, I see this a lot with parents of special needs kids. Hey look, it's how my parents parented me. Wasn't allowed to learn how to drive, wasn't allowed to keep track of my own money. If I ever wanted to leave the house alone, I'd be pelted with stories about all the horrible things that could happen to me. I didn't really start becoming an adult until my mid-20s. Parents that are super controlling and won't let their children make age-appropriate decisions. I had helicopter parents and can confirm all it does is delay your kid from taking any risks or learning how to try boundaries and make decisions until they move out and stakes are a lot higher and mistakes hurt them a lot more. Or you get sneaky when you're not home, or even when you are. I'm finally taking my own freedom and I just turned 20. Finally dressing how I want to dress, getting the piercings that I want, doing this that I want to do. Bought my dream car this year, even when I was threatened to be kicked out over it. She didn't kick me out, lol. My mother was incredibly controlling when I was in high school. It seemed to get worse the older I got. It was school and then dance, until 9 p.m. I wasn't allowed to hang out with friends or take days off of school. I look back and realize I went through a lot of emotional abuse, but this checks out too. When I turned 20, when I moved to a new city and went a little haywire for some years. This was me. Some kids cave and just act like they're going along with the insane parents. Other kids fight like hell to have some freedom. Both kids end up fucked up. Overly strict parents make sneaky, lying kids who have a ton of bad habits to break as adults, so they can have a somewhat normal life. Fuck these parents. When you get older after being raised like this, the damage stays with you. It also sucks because you also have you parents getting frustrated that an adult can't make normal adult commitments and ask you, why are you like this? Dunno, maybe not being allowed to make any of my own decisions growing up made making real decisions a pain in the ass. You can get better though. I'm not able to give advice, but I do want to say one thing that I've noticed as someone who has previously worked with special needs kids is that the parents who take the easy road short term, sweatpants every day, including when not appropriate, speaking for their kid when the child shows desire to speak for themselves but struggles, have a much longer and harder road ahead of them. You wanting to practice these behaviors is already better setting him up for success. You're doing good. Helicopter parents. Actually, I would say it's more of a lawnmower parent, which are parents that do everything for their child and hinders their maturity. Using guilt to manipulate the people closest to you. My grandmother, 99, can send my mum, 80, into such darkness with a swift and stinging comment. I hate to see it, and it is absolutely abusive. Your grandma sounds like the kind of person whose funeral features cake and balloons. Growing up, she was funny and fun to be around. These last few years, she has become so negative. She hates that her body doesn't work well, and she is frustrated that she is mainly stuck at home. I understand that sucks, but she is not grateful for anything anymore. She is extraordinarily stubborn, and honestly she says she is ready to be called home. I just wish she could treat everyone who is trying to help her with a little kindness and gratitude. It all sucks. Her brain is probably atrophying, which is causing her to be unpleasant. It might suck dealing with her in this state, but keep that in mind when she's being miserable towards everyone. This is something I'm learning while studying longevity. When certain parts of the brain go, it affects their mood and quality of life in a way which makes them depressed, anxious, bad with memory, and many other negative symptoms. Combine that with physical pain and immobility, and it's easy for someone to be miserable all the time. This is a big symptom of Alzheimer's as well. Not saying she has that. A brain at a certain point just starts rotting away. But after looking into Alzheimer's patients and symptoms, I become very empathetic to the effects old age can cause on someone's mental state. They aren't themselves. This isn't their true state revealing itself. Don't let the last few years dictate your judgment of the decades of good prior. Haven't seen it commented yet, but not teaching your children good food behaviors sets them up for EDS and a lifetime of self-esteem issues. Not allowing your children to show unhappy emotion. My mom would do this all the time throughout my childhood. Whenever I looked slightly off to her, she would lose it on me and go batshit crazy because I wasn't the little happy girl she used to know. It's really frustrating because sometimes I wasn't even upset to begin with until she started shouting at me about it. Damn, this hits home. As a child, I'd be happily going about my business, but unfortunately for me, I didn't smile enough for her liking, and this made her furious. She'd get so angry at me for not looking happy enough, even though I was happy, which would cause me to cry. The whole thing was maddening. Some days I thought I was going crazy. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. The beatings will continue until morale improves. Look, it's me with my mum. I see we have the same moment. We sort of made this mistake with our daughter. We just wanted her to have a good childhood, so tried to turn any unhappiness into something different. Instead of making things better for her, we ended up making things harder. We made her feel like negative emotions were a flaw, proof that she was a failing. She is an adult now, and we are steadily working through this together. She's amazing and forgiving. We are quite lucky. Admitting you made a mistake is a lot farther than many parents got. It also really helps with their healing, because they know they are not crazy and feel supported by the ones who made the mistake to begin with. I've always been amazed how much true and loving empathy helps, especially within families. I honestly think this is the very first time a parent merely suggests their actions had implications on their child. I'm not even joking. Usually I get the did the best with what they had, or times were different and they didn't know. Without anyone just acknowledging their kids are away today because of parental influence or lack thereof. Good or bad, it's just great to see this. My wife recently went through a breakup with a friend, and she was really struggling to feel like her anger was okay. Her mum told her, I think in part, that is our fault, because every time you were angry as a child, we told you there was no reason, and we told you it was wrong. And I know my wife deeply appreciated it, and actually it did help her feel like she had a right to be angry. It is so nice to see that sort of interaction. Not letting employees have a lunch break. Edit. Yes. It's illegal. My job requires constant monitoring, but it's a desk job, so I don't care. I just eat and work at the same time. If it were any other job, I would speak up. I'm also in the office completely by myself, which is nice. Or water. In a similar vein, underpaying employees with the excuse they're lucky to be employed at whatever place. Calling your partner vulgar offensive names in arguments. So many people believe this is normal couple behavior. My dad would get angry when my mom calmly tried to discuss family matters, and it always ended the same. He would call her a bitch, and she wouldn't raise her voice or curse back at him. I don't know how she did it. My dad didn't want to deal with anything after work. He worked and then he watched TV. Why have kids if you don't want anything to do with them? I hate when I read stuff like, my husband is so mean but he's a great father. If your kid has to witness their dad beating or berating their mom constantly, they're not a good dad. Oof, I used to rationalize staying in my awful marriage because he's a good father. Well, I got out and I'm now trying to help my son understand what a healthy relationship is, and I'm also having to help him navigate dealing with a self-centered father who doesn't show up when he says he will or follow through on anything that he promises him. Turns out he wasn't a good father, but benign neglect looks good compared to outright disrespect and abuse. Honestly, this is why I'm not keen on having children. I have very little energy most days, even less if I've had work that day. Just don't think I'd have the energy for a family. I left my ex-wife and my ex-girlfriend for this. I have been put down by my dad all my life when he was drunk. Seriously, at 4 years old, he was telling me how big of a piece of shit I was. I was with my ex-wife for 8 years and kept holding it in and finally had enough. I sadly reverted right back to the same type of person with my former ex after the ex-wife and she did the exact same thing in arguments. I will never be with someone like that again. I don't care what the argument is about, you can't take those things back. When you come home in a bad mood and take it out on your family. They didn't do anything, and they love you. Don't fuck it up with the name calling and yelling. Talk to them instead, or ask if you can just be left alone. Or you come into work and do the same to your employees. Telling someone that they did not hear or see what they did, making them question their memory and sanity, just so you don't look bad. This is called gaslighting. Parental alienation. Telling lies to children about their other parent really screws with kids' heads because they are 50% that other person. And also making the child be a mediator between parents because they're so immature that they can't behave like adults. Trying to gaslight someone out of their own aspirations, pursuing their own happiness due to your own insecurities and jealousy. Rage driving. Intentionally driving fast recklessly to frighten passengers. Being yelled at all the time, and those yells either having subtle or not threats. Even if there's no action on those words, it counts as mental abuse. I was in a relationship like this. The slightest inconvenience, and she'd scream at me. If she got lost, while she was driving, she screamed at me to find directions. I used to sit at work and dread quitting time because I knew I had to go home. A month after the breakup, a friend was driving me to look for an apartment and stated that we were lost. I had a panic attack hearing him say that. It was after that I figured out that I didn't walk away from that relationship unscathed. Taking a kid's door, privacy and control issues for life. Deny your kid any semblance of privacy, and they will become excellent at hiding things from you. It's a power play punishment, not an instructive one. At least, not in the way parents hope. It's especially backward-headed when used as a punishment for hiding things from the parents, as it reinforces that things must be hidden better. My dad used to do this a lot. You're dead on about it, reinforcing that you should hide things, particularly personal issues problems for me. Still don't feel comfortable being open with him, even though he's much more chill at this point. My parents took my brother and sister's doors a couple times, but it was specifically because they were slamming their doors so hard they cracked the drywall. My sister actually ended up slamming her door so hard it broke the latch, and she got trapped in her bedroom for hours because my mum wasn't home and nobody else knew how to get the door off its hinges. They were given a curtain on a tension rod as a replacement and had access to a bathroom with a locking door, because the point wasn't to take away privacy, it was to stop them from breaking the house. And it was not the first consequence for that behavior, it was the third. Yes, door in this instance is relative. The concept of purposefully taking or preventing bodily privacy as punishment for unrelated infraction. Not providing emotional support, shutting down someone's emotions, and telling them they are invalid or don't matter. Once I was in a pizza place and the manager-owner was yelling at an employee something along the lines of, "So what if your family dog died? There are thousands of them looking for a home, just get another one after work." That's not a valid reason to get a day off when the girl was leaving. Then he acted super polite to the rest of the customers, as if nothing had happened, maybe expecting people to agree with him. Your comment made me remember that I was disgusted at the lack of empathy. I don't know why you're overthinking this. It's not a big deal at all. You have no reason to be upset. Don't be so sensitive. The silent treatment. My mum would give me the silent treatment for weeks at a time. This caused a few things to happen. I stopped sharing things with her. I never knew what would offend her, so I don't really spend much time with her, and I'm very selective about what I tell her. I take her opinion with a grain of salt. My walls are very high with everyone. Now, decades later, ignoring me would instantly make me flip my shit. It backfired for my mother because I'd intentionally piss her off so she wouldn't bother me for a week. Controlling someone's finances. I used to work in victim support, and I spent so much of my time supporting service users with accessing an income or even opening a bank account. People don't realize that financial abuse can ruin the victims, especially if they don't have their own account. Without funds, they can't eat, they can't rent, They can't buy clothing or toiletries because more often than not, their abusers have withheld their possessions and have forced them out with nothing but the clothes on their back. Without funds, they can't purchase or replace it, which prevents them from opening accounts, getting jobs or driving. And even once those barriers are overcome, they have to learn to budget their money because their abuser has ensured that the victim is 100% dependent on them. If a victim of financial abuse struggles to overcome the situation, they return to the abuser because they consider it the safer option. It's much more tragic when children are involved because the abuser will weaponize that they're the provider, and that the other parent's lack of income savings is detrimental to their children, and based on that they should be the ones who are awarded custody. There's so much more to it, but it's devastating to see the impact it has. Emotional neglect. My parents, as a general rule of thumb, never gave a shit about anything going on with me unless I was getting low grades. We were 90% in their books. It's a rough one because it's the absence of caring as opposed to a concrete action. It's fucked up. I used to work in victim support, and I spent so much of my time supporting service users with accessing an income or even opening a bank account. People don't realize that financial abuse can ruin the victims, especially if they don't have their own account. Without funds, they can't eat. They can't rent. They can't buy clothing or toiletries because more often than not, their abusers have withheld their possessions and have forced them out with nothing but the clothes on their back. Without funds, they can't purchase or replace it, which prevents them from opening accounts, getting jobs or driving. And even once those barriers are overcome, they have to learn to budget their money because their abuser has ensured that the victim is 100% dependent on them. If a victim of financial abuse struggles to overcome the situation, they return to the abuser because they consider it the safer option. It's much more tragic when children are involved because the abuser will weaponize that they're the provider, and that the other parent's lack of income savings is detrimental to their children, and based on that they should be the ones who are awarded custody. There's so much more to it, but it's devastating to see the impact it has. Compulsive, consistent lying. You take away someone's ability to consent to a situation when you lie to them. Parentification of a child, usually the eldest child. In fiction, especially kids' shows where the parents are absent, it's usually the eldest kid who looks after the younger siblings. Or having to be your parent's parent because they have a mental disability. The child has to act as a mother and the father acts like a toddler, but being dependent on the toddler. I agree. I was parentified at a very young age. The media, however, fails to show often that it's not just the kid with absent parents. It can be the kids forced to parent their own parent, kids forced to parent their siblings because of their abusive household, and kids forced to not only parent their siblings, but their parents as well. A lot of people normalize this as being so mature and responsible for their age, but it stunts the child from being a child. They have to be older than what they are because they don't have anyone in their life who fills the role of a parent. And those who are parentified sometimes believe it's normal and may end up encouraging it in other people because they didn't know anything different. It's often the older kids because they've witnessed the abuse or experienced their situation the most, or they feel the need to take on the role because they're the oldest. Mandatory overtime. Work beyond your physical and mental well-being or you'll lose your income source. I agree. I was parentified at a very young age. The media, however, fails to show often that it's not just the kid with absent parents. It can be the kids forced to parent their own parent, kids forced to parent their siblings because of their abusive household, and kids forced to not only parent their siblings, but their parents as well. A lot of people normalize this as being so mature and responsible for their age. But it stunts the child from being a child. They have to be older than what they are because they don't have anyone in their life who fills the role of a parent. And those who are parentified sometimes believe it's normal and may end up encouraging it in other people because they didn't know anything different. It's often the older kids because they've witnessed the abuse or experienced their situation the most, or they feel the need to take on the role because they're the oldest. If this is everywhere, but this is certainly my experience. Bullying in school. We all know that bullying is abusive, but schools never treat it as such, and neither do parents. The way schools deal with bullying is also very enabler. Like, if you stand up for yourself, suddenly you're just as bad. This is literally not how it works at all. Psychologists and abuse specialists do not recognize reactive abuse as a legitimate form of abuse. God, I can name so many things. Subtle comments about somebody's appearance, in hopes that they'll become insecure with themselves, programming your partner to not see their friends, and to feel like they need to engage with you, most not supporting their passions, while acting like you're not against them investing in them, being controlling or overly jealous. It saddens me how many insane, abusive people there are out there that likely won't get identified as such by their partners. If you're not able to be who you want to be and see who you want to see because your partner respects you and trusts you to do what you say you will, there's some abuse in the equation. Mocking someone with a defense. "Oh, come on, I was just joking." Sheesh, lighten up. Doing someone a favor or helping them out and then casually mentioning how difficult it was for you and that it was a huge sacrifice.
"Hey, I got you your favorite candy bar. Oh, what a nice surprise. Thank you so much."
Yeah, I had to go 3 different places to find it and nearly roasted to death. It's so hot out. It's a lot more expensive than it used to be. Traffic was terrible. I almost got bound at the intersection, which would have been the perfect end to the shitty day I had. Sometimes this is followed up later with, "Aren't you going to eat your fucking candy bar?" Do that enough to a child, and when they're all grown up, they'll be terrified to ever ask anyone for anything. And they'll assume that when someone does something nice, that they're secretly resentful. Source: guess. When young children display behaviors that make them seem old and wise or beyond their years, it can be a symptom of them being parentified. I recently sat through an award ceremony that was all red flags. Children receiving awards for noticing when their teachers were not feeling well, checking on everyone else, putting the adults' feelings before their own. Those kids are probably not okay. Neglect, including neglecting your child's mental health. Staying in an unhealthy marriage for the kids. My parents are still together to this day, despite practically despising each other, and it made our household so miserable to grow up in. I think a lot of parents like mine think they can hide their issues from their kids, but it just never ends up working in the end, as the problems always end up spilling over onto the children. It's definitely negatively impacted my overall mental health to have grown up in such a volatile and aggressive household. Sexual assault in a married relationship. Elder abuse, especially when it's one elderly spouse abusing the other. It's like the entire medical system and society is blind to it. Forcing children to hug and kiss relatives when they clearly don't want to. I remember once an aunt of mine was leaving to go back home and asked me for a hug and a kiss. I didn't know her very well and was super shy as a kid and didn't want to. I was okay with the hug part, just not a kiss, even on the cheek. So I wrote the word kiss on a little piece of paper, went up to her and gave her an actual hug, then handed her the paper. I was expecting to be reprimanded or worse, laughed at. Instead, she got a big smile on her face and said, "That was really creative. I think I like that better than a real kiss." I found out years later that she carried that little scrap of paper in her wallet until she died.